You will wash these plates right now, every single one of them.
We are not taught to do chores. We never have to do this.
Wash those plates right now. It's not our job.
We're not taught to do chores.
The first maid quit in tears. The second one slammed the door so hard that a painting fell off the wall. The third one didn't even pack her bags. She just ran out the front gate barefoot, leaving her shoes behind on the marble floor. 7 pairs of shoes left behind at the front door, because 7 women ran out of the house so fast they didn't stop to put them back on. That's the first thing Grace saw when she walked up to the tall iron gate on a cold Tuesday morning in Connecticut. Not the mansion, not the fountain, not the shiny black car parked in the driveway, worth more than her whole apartment building. Just 7 pairs of shoes, lined up by the door like tiny gravestones. Each one a story of someone who couldn't handle what was waiting inside. She almost turned around right there, but something made her stop and look up at the big white house one more time. And in an upstairs window, she saw a small face peeking through the curtains. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, watching her with eyes that looked far too tired for someone so young. That look stayed with Grace. It's the reason she rang the doorbell instead of walking away. By the time this story ends, you'll understand why 2 children who had already learned that people don't stay fought their own father with everything they had just to keep one woman in their lives. Quick question before we continue. Where are you watching this from right now? And what's the time where you are? Drop it in the comments. I always read them. And if stories like this one grab you, tap that subscribe button now, because you do not want to miss where this one goes. Mark Doyle wasn't always cold. People who knew him before would tell you he used to laugh loud, dance badly at weddings, and call his wife every single day just to hear her voice in the middle of a busy afternoon. But that was before Claire packed her bags one rainy evening and told him she wanted a different life. One without diapers and school runs and a husband who was always thinking about the next deal instead of the family in front of him. She didn't take the twins with her. That part still confused people who heard the story. Most mothers fight for their children. Claire didn't. She kissed Leo and Mia on their heads, told them she loved them, and walked out the door to chase a life that had nothing to do with being a mom. She sends a birthday card sometimes. That's about it. So Mark, a man who built a shipping company worth more money than he could ever spend, found himself alone with his little twins and absolutely no idea what to do with them. He hired help. Of course he did. That's what men like him do when a problem shows up. He throws money at it and hopes it fixes itself. It never did. The twins grew up angry, though nobody around them wanted to call it that. They called it difficult, wild, hard to manage. But underneath all that anger was something much simpler and much sadder. 2 children who watched their mother walk away without looking back, and a father who was home in body, but somewhere else in every other way. So Leo and Mia learned early that people leave. And if people are going to leave anyway, why bother being nice to them first? That's how 7 maids ended up gone in 14 days. One quit after Mia hid frogs in her purse. Another left after Leo cut a hole in her coat while she wasn't looking. One just walked out mid-shift and never answered her phone again. Mark fired the rest himself, tired and frustrated, convinced his children were simply too much for anyone to handle. He didn't know the twins weren't testing the maids because they hated them. They were testing them because part of them wanted, more than anything, for someone to actually stay and prove them wrong. The agency that sent workers to the house had almost given up on the Doyle family. Word travels fast among housekeepers and nannies, and nobody wanted that job anymore. But one woman newer to the agency said she'd take it. Her name was Grace. She didn't ask about the salary first. She asked what the children liked to eat. The agency lady thought that was strange. Most people asked about pay, hours, days off. Grace just wanted to know what kind of soup the twins preferred. Mark almost said no when they told him about her. He was exhausted, done with hope, done with promises that fell apart within a week. But he had a business trip coming up and nobody else to watch the twins. So he agreed. 1 week, if it didn't work, he'd figure something else out. He had absolutely no idea that decision would flip his entire family upside down. Grace stood at that gate a moment longer, staring at those 7 pairs of abandoned shoes, and then she rang the bell anyway. When the housekeeper opened the door, she looked Grace over and simply said, You're brave. Grace smiled softly. The twins were sitting far apart on a huge leather couch when Grace walked in, both staring at their tablets like the rest of the world didn't exist. Leo had messy hair that stuck up in every direction. Mia had a scowl that looked way too old for an 8-year-old's face. Hi, Grace said, kneeling down so she wasn't towering over them. I'm Grace. Neither twin looked up. You leave soon, Mia mumbled without even glancing at her. They all leave. Even our own mom left. That sentence hit Grace like a slap, but she kept her face calm. Maybe, she said gently, but I'm here right now. And right now, I'd love it if you two showed me where the kitchen is. I get lost in big houses. Leo finally looked up, curious despite himself. Why should we help you? Because, Grace said, standing up and dusting off her knees, exploring a big house alone is boring. Exploring it with two people who already know all the secret spots sound a lot more fun. The twins looked at each other. It wasn't trust. Not even close. But it was something. Enough to get two stubborn kids off that couch for the first time all day. That evening, Grace didn't just cook dinner and quietly serve it the way the other maids had. She called the twins into the kitchen. Wash your hands, she said simply. You're helping me tonight. Mia crossed her arms tight against her chest. We don't do chores. That's what maids are for. Grace handed her a small towel anyway. Where I grew up, everybody helped in the kitchen, big house or small. Come on, I'll teach you a trick for cracking an egg with zero shell in the bowl. But you can't get it right the first try. That little challenge hooked Leo before he even realized it. He grabbed an egg before his sister could. Cracked it. Shell went everywhere, all over the counter and into the bowl. Grace laughed. Not at him, but right along with him, a warm, easy sound that neither twin had heard aimed at them in longer than they could remember. Almost, she said, smiling. Try again. Neither of them noticed it yet. But that was the exact moment the first tiny crack appeared in two very stubborn walls.
If this is already pulling at something in your chest, that's a good sign. Make sure you've liked this video, and if you're not subscribed, now's a great time, because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Over the next several days, Grace built small routines with the twins that had nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with pride. She taught Mia how to fold her own laundry, showing her how to press the sleeves flat and make neat little squares instead of tossing everything in a heap. This is dumb, Mia grumbled the first time, throwing a shirt on the floor. We have people for this. Grace picked it up calmly and placed it back in her hands. People aren't around forever to do everything for you, sweetheart, she said softly. Learning to take care of yourself isn't a punishment. It's a gift nobody can ever take away from you. Mia stared at her, thrown off by the gentleness in her voice, since no adult in that house had ever explained a chore like it actually meant something. She folded the shirt. It came out crooked. Grace smiled anyway, like it was the neatest fold she'd ever seen. You did that, Grace said. Nobody else. You. Something about that sentence lodged itself in Mia's chest like a splinter she couldn't quite name. Nobody else. You. For the first time in years, she felt like she had built something with her own two hands instead of just watching adults handle everything around her. Leo was tougher to reach. He carried the sharpest edges, the most anger, because he remembered his mother's face the clearest and understood the most about what it meant that she'd chosen to leave. He tested Grace exactly like he tested every maid before her. He hid her supplies. He said mean things, calling her useless, telling her she'd be gone within the week just like everybody else who ever walked through that door. Grace never once raised her voice. She simply found her supplies, calmly, patiently, and when he said something cruel, she knelt down so they were eye to eye. You're trying to make me leave, she said quietly, not with anger, just with a soft kind of truth. Before I can leave on my own. That way it hurts less. Am I close? Leo froze. Nobody had ever said something so true to him so directly before. He didn't answer. He just stormed off to his room and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, Grace brought a small plate of crackers up to his room, not as a reward, just because she figured he was probably hungry. She found him curled up by the window, knees pulled to his chest, staring out into the dark yard. She sat down beside him quietly, without pushing him to talk. After a long stretch of silence, Leo whispered, "Everybody leaves." "I know it feels that way," Grace said softly. "But I'm still here. And I'm not planning on going anywhere." "That's what they all say," he muttered. "Then don't listen to what I say," Grace answered. "Watch what I do instead. Every single day. When I'm still here on day 30, you can believe the actions instead of the words." Leo said nothing back. But he didn't tell her to leave either. And for a boy who had built walls taller than the house itself, that silence was the beginning of something completely new. Weeks passed, and something remarkable began happening inside that huge quiet house. Grace didn't just do chores for the twins, she did them alongside the twins. Every morning before school, she showed them how to make their own beds, tucking corners in tight, fluffing pillows just right. At first both kids complained loudly, but Grace never gave in. "Speed isn't the point," she told them one morning, admiring Mia's slightly lumpy but neatly made bed. "Pride is the point. When you build something with your own two hands, it belongs to you in a way nothing bought at a store ever could." Slowly, without either twin fully noticing it happening, something inside them began to shift. Mia started waking up early on her own, eager to see if she could fold her clothes even neater than the day before. She hummed while she worked, a small sound Grace noticed but never mentioned out loud, afraid pointing it out might scare the joy away. Leo, surprisingly, fell in love with cooking. Grace taught him scrambled eggs first, then pancakes, then simple pasta with butter and cheese. He loved how heat changed everything, how mixing plain ingredients created something entirely new. For a boy whose whole world had been rearranged without his permission, cooking gave him something he desperately needed. Control. Proof that his own two hands could make something good in a world that had already taken so much from him. "Grace, look," he shouted one afternoon, holding up a lopsided pancake like a trophy. "I made this all by myself." "You sure did," Grace said, clapping her hands, eyes shiny with something close to pride. "You know, plenty of grown men can't even manage that." Leo beamed so wide it nearly broke Grace's heart, because in that instant she understood exactly how starved these children were. Not for toys. Not for money. For someone to simply notice them. To be proud of them for no reason other than the fact that they tried. The twins began washing their own dishes after dinner, standing on little step stools by the sink, giggling as soap bubbles floated up and popped on their noses. They folded their laundry without being asked twice. They raced each other every morning to see who could make their bed first. And somewhere between the scrambled eggs and folded shirts, the twins started laughing again. Loud, messy, real laughter that filled hallways which had stayed silent for far too long. They stopped waiting for Grace to leave and started running to the door when they heard her car in the driveway on her one day off, throwing their arms around her before she'd even taken off her coat. They started calling her something neither of them had called anyone in a very long time. Meanwhile, Mark stayed mostly unaware, buried in meetings and contracts, flying city to city, chasing deals that felt more important than they actually were. He got short weekly updates from the housekeeper saying things like children are adjusting and all is well. He never asked for more detail. As long as there wasn't another slammed door or a maid quitting mid-shift, he told himself everything was fine. He had no idea his children were learning to cook. No idea they made their own beds now, did their own laundry, woke up excited instead of dreading the day ahead. No idea a quiet woman with a small suitcase had done in 5 weeks what he hadn't managed in 3 long years. She had made his children feel safe again. But peace like that rarely stays quiet for long. It happened on a Friday evening. Mark came home earlier than planned, hoping to surprise the twins before another trip pulled him away again. He walked through the front door expecting the usual heavy silence. Instead, he heard laughter. He followed the sound into the kitchen and stopped dead in the doorway. Mia stood on a step stool at the sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a pot and humming softly. Leo stood at the counter, carefully cutting vegetables with a small safe knife, tongue poking out in concentration. Grace stood between them, guiding their hands, laughing at something Leo had said. Mark's first reaction wasn't gratitude. It was fear. Old, buried fear that clawed its way up from somewhere he thought he'd sealed shut. He saw his children doing kitchen work, and all he could think was, this isn't what I built this life for. They shouldn't have to do this. This is servant work. He didn't stop to ask why. He didn't notice that Mia's usually tense shoulders were relaxed. He didn't notice that Leo, who hadn't smiled genuinely in longer than Mark could remember, was grinning ear to ear. All Mark saw was his children working in his kitchen, and something inside him snapped, an anger that had nothing to do with Grace and everything to do with years of feelings he never properly dealt with. What is going on in here? His voice sliced through the warm kitchen like a blade. The laughter died instantly. Mia's hands froze in the sink. Leo dropped his small knife with a clatter. Grace turned slowly, calm but alert. "Mr. Doyle," she said carefully. "I didn't hear you come in. I was just..." "Just what?" Mark snapped, stepping fully into the kitchen, his face flushed with anger that surprised even himself. "Making my 8-year-olds work like they're hired help in their own home." "Dad," Leo said, stepping forward, his small voice shaking but firm. "She's not making us. We want to." "You want to wash dishes?" Mark's voice rose, disbelief tangled up in anger. "You want to cook and clean like we don't have people paid to do exactly that?" Mia climbed down from her stool, chin trembling but eyes fierce. "We like it. Grace says it's important to know how to take care of yourself." "Grace says a lot of things, apparently," Mark said sharply, turning his cold stare toward her. "Things that aren't hers to say. You were hired to run this house, not raise my children your own way." Grace's chest tightened, but she stood firm. "Mr. Doyle, I never meant to overstep. I only wanted to teach them independence, confidence, the ability to." "I don't need you teaching them anything," Mark cut in, voice like ice now. "I need you keeping this house running and my children comfortable. That's the whole job." The kitchen went silent, heavy and suffocating. The twins stood frozen, watching their father's fury aimed at the one person who had made them feel like a real family again. "You're fired," Mark said finally, the words dropping like stones into still water. "Pack tonight. I'll find someone else by Monday." Grace's eyes glistened but she nodded, professional even as her heart pounded. "Understood, sir." "No." The scream ripped out of Mia, sharp and desperate, cutting through the kitchen like a siren. She ran and wrapped her arms around Grace's waist, holding tight with a strength she didn't know she had. "You can't fire her. She's the only one who stayed." "Mia," Mark started, caught off guard by his usually quiet daughter's sudden explosion. "No, Dad." Leo shouted too, moving beside his sister, fists clenched, tears streaming despite his best efforts to hold them back. "You don't get it. Mom left. You leave every single day for work. Every maid you ever hired left too. Grace is the only one who didn't. She stayed even when I was mean to her on purpose." Mark stood frozen, his anger draining out of him as his son's words landed like a truck he never saw coming. "She taught us to make our own bed," Mia sobbed into Grace's side. "She taught us to cook. She made us feel like we matter, Dad. Not like we're just kids you're too busy to look at." Each word struck somewhere deep in Mark's chest, somewhere he'd sealed shut since the night Claire drove away and never came back. "We don't want a new maid," Leo said, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "We want Grace. If she goes, we're going with her." Silence swallowed the whole room. Mark looked at his children, really looked at them, for what felt like the first time in years. He saw the way Mia clung to Grace like a lifeline. He saw Leo standing protectively beside his sister, ready to fight a battle no 8-year-old should ever have to fight. And then he looked at Grace, not as staff, but as the woman who had quietly given his children back their laughter. Something in his chest cracked open. "Give me a minute," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Please. All of you." He turned and walked into his office, closing the door behind him. For the first time since Claire left, Mark Doyle sat down and cried, not for a lost business deal, but for years of missed mornings and missed bedtimes that could never be gotten back. Imagine being those two kids for a second. Standing between the two people you needed most, watching one nearly get taken away. If this is hitting you the way it's hitting me, comment below and tell me, Have you ever had to fight for someone who mattered to you? Stay subscribed, because what happens next will surprise you. It took almost an hour before Mark came back out. His eyes were red, his tie loosened, all his usual Polish gone. He found the three of them still in the kitchen, sitting quietly together, Grace's hands wrapped around both small hands, calming their fears. "Grace," he said quietly, "can we talk? Alone?" Mia's grip tightened, panic flashing across her face. "It's okay," Grace whispered, gently loosening her fingers. "I'll be right back. I promise." She followed Mark into the hallway. He rubbed the back of his neck, struggling for words that never came easily to a man used to negotiating big contracts but completely unprepared for this. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, voice rough. "I walked in, saw something I didn't understand, and reacted from my own mess instead of asking questions." Grace stayed quiet, letting him continue. "Claire used to do things like that with them," he said, voice catching. "Turning chores into little games. When I saw them laughing in that kitchen, it looked so much like the family we used to be before she left. It scared me, because some sick part of me has been avoiding anything that reminds me of what fell apart." Grace's expression softened. "Grief does strange things, Mr. Doyle," she said gently. "Even the grief of someone leaving instead of dying. It makes us push away things that might actually be healing us." Mark nodded slowly, wiping his eyes, no longer caring about looking composed. "They fought for you," he said. "My kids, who barely say more than a few words to me most days, fought harder for you tonight than I've heard them fight for anything in years." "They're good kids," Grace said softly. "They just needed someone to remind them they're capable. That they matter. That's all I ever tried to do." "Please stay," Mark said, voice thick. "Not just as their maid. Help me learn how to be their father again. I've been so buried in work and my own hurt that I forgot how to actually show up for them." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored to stay," she said. "But they don't need me to teach you how to be their dad. They just need you to try. That's all children ever really want. Not perfection. Just presence." When they walked back into the kitchen together, both twins jumped up, searching Grace's face for the answer before anyone said a word. She smiled and nodded, and the sound that burst out of those two kids was pure, messy joy, laughing and crying all tangled together as they threw themselves around her waist. Mark stood back, watching his children celebrate with a kind of joy he hadn't seen in years, and something inside him healed a little more. Months passed. Mark started coming home earlier, not every single day, but enough that the twins learned to trust it wasn't a fluke. He started showing up at school events. He learned Mia loved space and dreamed of being an astronaut. He learned Leo had a real talent for drawing, filling notebook after notebook with sketches, eventually drawing his whole family together, smiling, in front of their house. Grace stayed through it all, never trying to replace what the family lost, never trying to be their mother. She became something the family needed but didn't have a name for, a bridge between a father lost in old pain and children hungry for connection. She taught the twins how to garden in the small plot behind the house that had sat untouched since Claire left. They planted tomatoes and sunflowers, learning patience in a world that had taught them everything comes instant and easy. We're getting close to the end now, and I promise you this ending will stick with you. But first, if you've made it this far, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with somebody who needs a reminder, and if you're not subscribed, now's your moment. Let's finish this together. A full year passed since Grace first stood at that iron gate staring at 7 pairs of abandoned shoes. The twins, now 9, made their own beds every morning without being asked, helped cook simple dinners on weekends, understood that taking care of themselves and others wasn't punishment, just quiet pride. Mia started a small garden club at school, teaching her classmates what Grace had taught her. Leo insisted on making breakfast every Sunday, proudly serving slightly burnt pancakes the whole family devoured anyway. Mark still ran his company, still closed big deals, but he built walls around his evenings and weekends now, protecting that time fiercely. He'd learned success meant nothing if he came home to a house that felt like a hotel instead of a home. One evening, almost a year to the day since Grace arrived, Mark called a small family meeting in the living room. He held a folder in his hands, his voice unsteady in a way that surprised his children, who rarely saw their confident father look uncertain about anything. "Grace," he said, "this past year, you haven't just worked in this house. You rebuilt it. You gave my kids back their joy. You gave me back a version of myself I thought I lost the day Claire walked out that door." Grace's eyes glistened, unsure where this was headed. "I'd like to offer you a permanent place here," Mark continued, "not just as a maid, but as part of this family's future. Real security, real partnership in raising these two, a thank you that goes way past words." He handed her the folder. Inside were papers, not just a new contract, but a trust fund set up in her name. "Say yes," Mia shouted, bouncing off the couch. "Please, Grace." Leo grinned through tears. "You're basically already family anyway." Grace looked at the three of them, this father who learned to heal, these children who learned to trust again, and nodded, unable to speak through her tears for a long moment. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course, yes." The twins tackled her in a hug so big they nearly knocked the chair over, all three laughing and crying together while Mark watched his family, his real, whole, healing family, with a gratitude that nearly brought him to his knees. Later that night, after the twins finally fell asleep, Mark found Grace in the kitchen quietly washing the last of the dinner dishes, a habit she never fully gave up. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Why did you stay? That first week, when they were awful to you, when I was cold and barely there. 7 others walked away. Why not you?" Grace dried her hands slowly, thinking. "Because I saw myself in them," she said. "I grew up in a house where people came and went too. Nobody stayed long enough to teach me I was worth staying for. I promised myself if I ever got the chance to be that person for someone, I wouldn't waste it. Your kids weren't difficult, Mr. Doyle. They were hurting. There's a big difference, if you know how to look for it." Mark felt his throat tighten. "Most people don't know how to look," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." "But you did," Grace said gently. "In the end, you did. That's what matters." Years later, Leo and Mia would tell this story to anyone who asked about their childhood. About the 7 who came and went, and the 8th one who stayed. About a woman with one small suitcase who taught them that love isn't about having everything done for you. It's about someone believing you're capable, and staying close enough to catch you if you fall. They'd say the real gift Grace gave them wasn't cooking or folding laundry. It was proof, real lived proof, that not everyone leaves. That staying is possible. That family isn't only blood, it's whoever chooses to remain when leaving would have been so much easier. Before you go, here are 5 simple truths this story leaves behind. Love isn't measured by what you buy someone, but by the time and patience you give them. Real strength isn't doing everything for the people you love, it's teaching them they're capable enough to do it themselves. Pain can make good people act in ways they never intended, and the ones who stay through that pain often love us the deepest. Children don't need perfect parents, they need present ones, showing up again and again even after mistakes. And sometimes the person who changes your whole life doesn't come with money or status, but with patience, kindness, and the simple choice to stay when everyone else left. If this story touched you even a little, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which part moved you most, and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next story.